aligning incentives in supply chains, other methods. So I mentioned a buyback contract, and we talked about buyback contracts in detail on how to uh, calculate the buyback price that will maximize the total profit of the supply chain and therefore increase expected profits of all stages in the supply chain. But there are other methods where incentives can also be aligned and the total profit of supply chain could be maximized or double marginalization could be avoided. The first method is to use quantity discounts. And because these are seasonal products, quantity discount might make sense, right? If we ordered, for example, Zamatia offered a discount for UV if they order at least 400 units, then UV might decide to order 400 units and improve the profitability of both. Another way is to use options contracts. Options contracts were such contracts where a buyer pays one price to purchase the option and another price to exercise an option. It is a way for the buyer to encourage the supplier to build capacity, right? It allows for some risk sharing. The supplier earns at least the option price, even if it's not exercised, while the buyer doesn't have to pay for all the unused capacity when this capacity is unutilized. Of course, these options contracts are used in different circumstances, but they also can achieve 100% supply chain efficiency. By what that I mean that the supplier will build the right amount of capacity, and then we can also have designs that will divide the supply chain profit among the two firms in any way we like. The third method is revenue sharing. In that kind of contract, the supplier accepts a low upfront wholesale price in exchange for a share of revenue. So when the sale happens, part of the revenue is shared by the retailer with the supplier. Again, under appropriately chosen parameters, retailer has incentive to stock more inventory, and that generates more revenue for the supply chain. Another method to align incentives is to use quantity flexibility contract. The idea is that we share the risk between the supplier and buyer. The supplier and buyer agree on some quantity Q and the percentage flexibility margin alpha. And the idea is that by signing a contract, the buyer is committed to buy at least 1 minus alpha times the quantity Q. So for example, if it is alpha is 20%, then the buyer is committed to buy at least 80% of Q, while the supplier is committed to supplying at least or up to a quantity of 120% of Q, right? So if the demand is weak, supplier is protected by this lower limit, right? Because the supplier knows at least 80% of the quantity will be purchased. And if demand is strong, the buyer has the advantage of an extra capacity they can use, that's the extra 20% above Q. One more method of aligning incentives in supply chain is a price protection program. In certain industries, for example, in PC, personal computer industry, prices tend to be reduced frequently. For example, the wholesalers will reduce prices of some products without notice. And of course, that will create a disincentive among retailers to hold the right large quantities. They will try to lower the inventory quantities because the moment the wholesale price is reduced, they actually have products they bought right in inventory. They bought them for a higher price than the current wholesale price. Right. This is of course not for seasonal products, but for some products that are held for longer periods of time. And a price protection program right here or contract will remove this disincentive to hold larger inventory by offering retailer compensation on remaining inventory for any price reduction. So the idea is, let's say you buy a product for $200 now at a wholesale price, right? A retailer buys for $200 for the wholesaler, but the moment that wholesale price is reduced, let's say to 150, right, by $50, the retailer should be compensated for all units that the retailer hasn't sold yet, right, the $50, so that the units that they have are as if they bought the retailer bought them at a reduced price.